He ignored her for 3 years. That sentence is a small, sharp thing that fits into the corner of every photograph of Tang Ling's life. It fits into empty chairs at dinner, into unread messages, into the way a house feels when someone is gone but their name still takes up air. It fits into the bruise on her pride the size of a family portrait. Mornings begin the same way. Light like apology leaking through the blinds, a kettle hissing on the stove, Tang Ling setting out 2 cups of tea as if ritual might conjure him back. The second cup cools untouched. The phone on the counter glows with missed calls from a number that means power. Wen Chuan, Wen Xiao, the man whose suits are headlines and whose absence is a strategic silence that fills boardrooms. He is the CEO who runs half the city and neglects his own home. She learns the small humiliations of being invisible. The maid answers every visitor with the practiced smile of someone who knows not to make trouble. Mrs. Wen, her mother-in-law, has perfected the thin kindness of the woman who knows a better marriage, one that produces investors and heirs. "You should be more grateful," Mrs. Wen says once, the words as flat and deliberate as a verdict. Gratitude is measured and found wanting because the family's ledger never balances in Tang Ling's favor. At company events, she is a prop, a face in the crowd, a name that exists only when loyalty needs to be announced. Outside those rooms, Wen Chuan's life is another orbit. He sends goodbye kisses by text, praises by email, and never the kind of look that keeps a woman's heart from packing itself. She learns to keep the quiet. She smooths tablecloths. She irons shirts he will never see close. She answers questions about schedules she doesn't get to set. Her life is catalogued in small services rendered and larger humiliations swallowed. There are years of dinners where she is the background for stories and the subject of jokes, endless apologies she is expected to accept, and a mother-in-law who prays with the intensity of someone counting blessings. Then a phone call changes everything in 40 seconds. The voice on the other end is steady and humane, and it names things that feel like cliffs. Dr. Liu, careful, clinical, good with his hands, explains tests, nasal mass, prognosis phrased in clinical absolutes. 1 to 3 months, he says. The words fall like a closing door. The house, which had been quietly bronzed by routine, becomes a stage. Conversations tighten. The same relatives who pretended not to notice now practice sympathy like costumes. Mrs. Wen moves with an economy of feeling that is astonishing. She organizes a condolence schedule before Tang Ling's hair has even dried from the hospital sink. Aunties arrive with the guilty efficiency of flocking crows. They speak with the practiced gravity of people who know how to distribute grief in a family where reputation is a currency. "Make sure everything is ready," Mrs. Wen says, as if Tang Ling's life were a ledger more important to close than to live. There's time for saying goodbye. There is an unromantic moment when Tang Ling is asked to sit and sign forms for funeral arrangements like a clerk filing her own obituary. The world approaches her through ritual. People use the word peaceful, as if it were an instruction manual. Inside her, something snaps like a thread cutting through a seam. The diagnosis is a thunderclap that paradoxically gives her air. If time is short, she reasons, she will refuse to spend the rest of it invisible and apologetic. After 3 years of being treated as an accessory to a fortune, she will stage one last performance that cannot be ignored. She smiles. The smile is small at first. It becomes a plan. "I'm going to throw a funeral," she tells nobody. But her voice is a bright, dangerous promise even to herself. She imagines pomp and etiquette turned into spectacle. She imagines a room full of well-born people having their delicacy outraged. She imagines the jade bracelet, the green, defiant circle of the family's history that sits under Mrs. Wen's glass case, on the auction block, glowing under spotlight like an altar they must fight over. She imagines 10 men, not pallbearers but a parade of handsome brunch models, stepping like an accusation into the reserved air of her in-laws' world. Her plan is equal parts theater and accusation. It isn't about revenge for the sake of revenge. It is about being seen. It is about turning every hand that has dismissed her into a witness. She begins the negotiations with the calm of someone who has learned how to navigate other people's indifference. She calls a funeral house as if this were a civilized business transaction. She asks for the ornate package, the full procession. She asks for theatricality. There is an odd English in her requests. I want the last night celebration. She's precise. She asks the funeral house to make space for something outrageous. 10 handsome men, hired as honor attendants. The funeral director blinks. Tang Ling explains it the way people explain a joke that will be funny later. One breath, and then nothing else. When the director asks questions, how to dress them, what music, she says, let them be 10 types. Let them be absurd, let them be real. Let them be my last audience. There is a small private victory in the absurdity. The vendors gossip, delighted and scandalized. The fashion coordinator is ecstatic. The men arrive in cliques. The movie star type who can look vaguely bored at the universe. The boy next door whose smile seems stolen from sunshine. The brooding model who looks like an entire drama. The dancer with a grin and a back that invites trouble. They are ridiculous and perfect. They are spectacle. She buys the jade bracelet herself. It costs nothing in comparison to the currency of insult it will unsettle. The bracelet is an emblem. Wrist ornament of inheritance, of arrangements made before her birth. A circle of green that speaks of legacy. Tang Ling buys it quietly from a jeweler who is used to people buying silence. She wraps it in tissue like she is a conspirator bribing fate. There are small preparations. A dress that reads like a headline. Invitations sent under the pretense of charity for the hospital, where she received the diagnosis. The charity angle, a neat public alley through which private thunder can march. The room where the auction will happen is one of those spaces that has heard too much complicity. Chandeliers drop their lessons in gold. A silent auction board stands like a judge. The guest list is curated to maximize discomfort. Guests who are rivals, shareholders who still like their stakes intact, Mrs. Wen's friends who will rate and measure sorrow, Zhao Qingqing, the designer with the perfect venom for the kind of woman who is polite until she is not. Manager Fang and Li Fen, 2 smiling vultures who draft their ambitions like blueprints. And of course other directors, dressed in the armor of reputation, mobile with their private little cruelties. Tang Ling moves through the days with a strange focus, as if she is conserving the last of herself for a performance she is determined to give with the full tenderness of somebody who has decided to stop apologizing. Before the event, there is a scene that looks like a family formal. Mrs. Wen is all prayer shawls and measured breath. She practices being upset like a professional. She arranges the condolence books on a marble slab and makes sure the lighting is sympathetic. Her voice drops to the precise octave that reads as tragic enough for eyes on television. We will honor her quietly, she tells relatives. It is not necessary to make a spectacle. Tang Ling agrees to the face. She has to. There are cameras, there will be whispers. But inside she is humming with plans. She has hired a choreographer. She has rehearsed entrances. The 10 men know cues and beats. They are, each of them, a little ridiculous in their devotion to the job. They parade, they bow, they mock the performance of somberness with a self-awareness that Tang Ling loves. She sends one small cruel invitation to the family before the auction, an elegantly written note announcing that a memorial auction will be held for Tang Ling's last wish. Items of personal significance will be sold to benefit the charity. Mrs. Wen reads it like a misdelivered letter. She is offended and intrigued in equal measure, like a queen given a counterfeit crown. The relatives murmur. Zhao Qingqing arranges her lipstick with mechanical grace. On the day, the venue hums with a particular breed of expectancy, the kind that smells like perfume and the faint metallic tang of power. Champagne seethes in flutes. Tablet screens blink with bid updates. The jade bracelet is placed on its velvet cushion under a glass bell that glitters like a planet. It is not just a piece of jewelry anymore. Under the lights, it is a relic, a challenge, an accusation dressed in green. Tang Ling arrives late. She steps down into a dress that is black but has a sliver of rhetorical red across the shoulder. A single cut of color that reads as defiance. She is not what anyone expected to wear to her own funeral. She is too alive. Her makeup is deliberate, almost theatrical. Her hair is pulled back in a style that refuses apology. The 10 men stand as a slow revelation. They move like a choir of absurdity, one in a tux with a carnation, another barefoot in a linen shirt as if he wandered in from a dream, another wearing a suit that makes everyone else's tailoring look timid. They are not there for eroticism, They are there to create a ridiculousness the family cannot name. People whisper, someone laughs, then stops. The auction begins like an orchestra warming up. A host, polished and practiced, announces items with the ease of someone who has never had to explain why grief should be performative. Bidders raise envelopes. Cameras zoom. Tang Ling sits with an expression that is closer to study than sorrow. She watches the room watch her. For the first time in years, people are giving her attention that is tinged with envy and curiosity. It is a strange currency. Zhao Qingqing drifts forward, the social predator ribboned in impeccable haute couture. Her smile is the kind that trims a person into something smaller. "I will bid for the bracelet," she says casually into the microphone. The words like a declaration from someone who has always assumed the room is hers. There is a murmur. Manager Fang leans too close to the host like an accomplice. Li Fen makes a show of dialing a number, an old move that says the fight is not a matter of sentiment but of stakes. Wen Chuan arrives then, and the room changes. He comes in like a hush. His suits have the geometry of north winds. For 3 years his absence has been a strategy. Now his presence is elemental. He is not the man who storms through in grand gestures. He is the kind who keeps his hands in his pockets. He stands at the back of the room and watches the spectacle like a stranger watching a theater from the cheap seats. His face is unreadable. He watches Tang Ling. The room watches him watching her. For a moment there is a clean, dangerous silence. The family stiffens. Mrs. Wen's face is a landscape where accomplishment and confusion wrangle. Her mouth tightens. Tang Ling feels the pressure of the gaze. Something like the old ache lifts. It is replaced by something new. A pulsing awareness that she has given this man a stage, and he has returned late to a play that is about him as much as it is about her. He has always been the protagonist by default. Now she has made him part of her scene. Going once, the auctioneer calls. Going twice. Bids rise. Envelopes flutter. Zhao Qingqing is composed, her staff circulating the numbers she wants. Manager Fang counts like a conductor of modest ambitions. The jade bracelet's price climbs, not because of value, but because it is becoming a totem of competitive virtue. Wen Chuan is still at the back. Then he moves. It is quiet at first, a small movement across a room that suddenly means everything. He comes forward with the steady, inexorable demeanor of a man who has measured 1,000 boardroom fights and now finds himself in one that bleeds differently. 5 million, he says. The room halts. 5 million is not symbolic. 5 million is the kind of bid that rearranges a ledger. People look at him as if a picture of him has been turned to color. Faces rearrange like people trying to find new reading glasses. Zhao Qingqing's smile disappears with the grace of a curtain dropping. Wen Chuan raises his paddle again. 10 million. The auctioneer's voice falters. Cameras lean in. Board members who had been calculating futures with the bloodless efficiency of people who own other lives now look very small in their suits. Tang Ling watches him as if she is seeing a new constellation. There is something in his eyes, not the practiced distance he keeps in conference rooms, but a raw, shameful human flair that rises when someone realizes that their wealth cannot replace things they have missed. For a fraction of a heartbeat, the years of absence are visible on his face in a way no accountant can audit. He keeps bidding. Each number lands like a small confession. It is not just money being spent. It is a language of regret in the only dialect he knows. People in the room begin to murmur nervously. Directors exchange glances the color of receipts. Mrs. Wen's hand clamps into a pale fist. Her perfect composure frays at the edges. The 10 men perform their parts with a dignity that leans to the theatrical. They circle the stage, creating a tableau that frames the family like a living indictment. The crowd watches the tableau with varying degrees of incomprehension. Some laugh in a brittle way. Others, the ones used to being in control, suddenly have a new thing to account for. Emotion. Public emotion. Unpredictable emotion. Wen Chuan's voice cracks at one point. His next bid is not a number, but a sound like someone trying to reach a shore with a single oar. He continues. He outbids everyone until the jade bracelet is his at a sum that should have made envelopes rain like confetti. People hiss. The press leans forward, savoring the human interest story that topples careers. When the gavel falls, Tang Ling is stunned in the way of spectators who realize they have an audience. She smiles, but it is complicated. It's not the triumph she imagined in fantasy. It is something new and messy. The crowd parts like a sea. Wen Chuan steps close enough that his shadow falls across her dress. He is not angry. He is not calm. He is raw. He is a man hindered by vision, a corporate titan who has discovered that even enormous things cannot fix what has been missed. He holds the bracelet like a small world between his fingers, looking as if he has come late to a wedding only to be asked for an explanation. "No one touches my wife's things," he says. He sounds as if he is giving instructions to a child and to himself. It is a statement both possessive and bewildered. The room listens like a jury. Mrs. Wen's face is a study in collapse and triumph. She is alarmed to find that something of her practiced order has been stolen by the very man who should have been its defender. In her eyes, the spectacle is a wound and an accolade both. The press eats the scene. Camera shutters stutter like nervous birds. The bid is not just a bid. It is a public admission, a splurge of money that screams more than balance sheets ever could. The directors shift uneasily. Where money moves, control trembles. Tang Ling watches Wen Chuan. Part of her pulses with an accomplishment that is half theater, half personal triumph. She had planned a spectacle to be seen. She had wanted to force the eyes that never looked to look. He has looked, and the look is messy and louder than it was ever trained to be in boardrooms. She feels something like satisfaction, and beneath it, a new, softer terror. What if seeing is not the same as understanding? He places the bracelet on a table between them, fingers lingering. The gesture looks like apology without words. It looks like proof. People around them lean forward, as if they expect a reconciliation, like an announcement on quarterly returns. But nothing in this room is that tidy. The moment is loud enough to be a verdict. Some people in the crowd clap, tentative, because applause is the social mechanism by which people shore up narratives that make them comfortable. Others stare with mouths slightly open, the kind of face that happens when you watch someone you thought you knew become suddenly unknowable. Mrs. Wen stiffens and makes a small incision of a laugh that means she has lost the framing. "We did everything proper," she says quickly, as if explaining a recipe gone wrong. Her voice has the brittle brightness of someone who finds public spectacle a poor substitute for private obedience. Zhao Qingqing's jaw sets. Manager Fang's smile is a measured thing that begins to harden into calculation. Someone murmurs about leaks and investors and reputations. There is the dog-eared sound of business responding to emotion with legalese. Tang Ling's inner monologue is simple. She keeps her voice low, a private commentary that cuts through the noise like a blade. "I did it. They're watching." She tastes the cinder of something she didn't know she wanted, attention given in a way that disrupts hands that had always smoothed her down. She had wanted to be seen. She did not bargain for the way it would feel now that the seeing had come without softness. Wen Chuan moves away then, like someone who has finished throwing stones into a river and needs to know which ones have sunk. He crosses the floor, turns back once. His face is set in an expression Tang Ling has rarely seen. Not quite apology, not quite rage, but a rawness that has the texture of grief. The crowd parts to let him go. He is disrupting a game he has long known how to win. The evening ends in a hush of social recovery. People collect themselves in clusters, balancing the need to gossip with an instinct to preserve normalcy. The jade bracelet sits like a small green moon on the velvet. The 10 men line up and exit with the slowly amused solidarity of hired actors who have watched a private war turn public. They are absurd. They are glorious. They are part of Tang Ling's new mythology. In the kitchen of a hotel suite the night after, Tang Ling sits in the wake of it all. The adrenaline has left the room sticky and luminous. She turns the jade bracelet over in her hands as if it might explain everything. Her phone buzzes with messages she never reads until the morning. There are polite condolences folded in with panicked texts from shareholders who now see risk where they saw none. There are photos on social media that begin to morph the night into a story. The world is a feed of opinions and cheap morality, and everyone has an angle. Her inner voice is quieter now. I wanted to be seen, she thinks, and the seeing has arrived in an ugly, honest way. She feels triumphant, yes. She feels exposed, yes. She feels, in a way she did not expect, terrified. Someone knocks on the suite door. It is Mrs. Wen. She stands just inside the threshold, a silhouette in a shawl that wants to say condolences in the currency she knows. Command softened into faux concern. For a breath, there is the history of years between them laid out like a chessboard. Moves, counters, protective maneuvers. Mrs. Wen's face is a desert of intent. "My daughter," Mrs. Wen says, not calling Tang Ling by her name, but a phrase that is both a title and an accusation. "What have you done?" Tang Ling looks at her, and for once bitterness is tempered by an invitation to understanding. "I made people look," she answers. Her voice has the weary lightness of someone who has been preparing fireworks and then surprised at the brightness when they go off. Mrs. Wen's eyes glint with something that could be anger or calculation. "You embarrassed us." The sentence is simple, but under it lies a worry that maps like a fingerprint across the family's swift plans. Investors whispering, stock prices trembling, the board scrabbling for a narrative that will sanitize this spectacle. "You made them see," Tang Ling replies. "There's a difference." Mrs. Wen stands for a beat longer than manners require. Then she folds her hands with the neatness of a woman who has always translated emotion into policy. "You will pay for this in ways you cannot imagine," she says in a tone that promises coldness more enduring than any one night. It is a warning, but even she understands how hollow it sounds in the face of the auction's aftershock. Tang Ling smiles thinly. She picks at the clasp of the bracelet like she might need to remind herself that it is real. "Good," she says. "I plan to." Outside, the city hums, as if nothing has changed. Inside, for the first time in years, the air between Tang Ling and Wen Chuan has the charged flavor of possibility. The spectacle has cracked something that was made of habit. It has exposed the seams. It has made the family reconsider the arithmetic of neglect. There is a low sound under everything now, the soft rustle of lawyers counting clauses, journalists typing headlines, directors calculating ballot numbers. The room that had watched a spectacle is now a pressure cooker, and the gust of wind the auction created will need to be managed. Tang Ling knows this. She also knows she is not the same woman who sat with a kettle sighing on the stove. When she turns off the lights that night, she thinks of the 10 men, of how their absurd presence was the hinge that has tilted her life into a different plane. She thinks of Wen Chuan's eyes like an admission. She thinks of the bracelet warm on her wrist, like absurd jewelry and like a letter from destiny. There are many ways a plan can be incomplete. Tang Ling's performance has been executed. The public work is done. The private work, she understands in a slow, sidelong way, is just beginning. The next morning, the headlines do not sleep. The internet has condensed the night into sound bites. Wen Xiao loses it. The jade bracelet worth millions. Who won? The funeral that wasn't. Boardrooms whisper and phones chirp. Investors ask for meetings to be moved forward. In a sterile conference room high above the city, the board gathers with the kind of speed that only money can organize. Faces that were quiet in the auction now look like commanders ready to contain a contagion. Wen Chuan walks in 10 minutes late. He looks like a man who has not finished being seen. They do not offer him the soft condolences Goliaths usually receive. They offer a ledger. Chairs move. A director clears his throat and speaks the language Wen Chuan has been fluent in for years: numbers and risk, the calculus of perception. He asks direct questions about control and reputation. He mentions shareholder confidence and suggests measures that smell of replacement, of a CEO trimmed down to a figurehead. Wen Chuan listens for a long time. He answers in small, measured sentences. He does not defend himself with the slick evasions of men who spend their lives negotiating futures. He looks like someone who has been surprised by his own heart. Outside the conference room, Mrs. Wen meets with other family elders like generals convening. Their faces are taut with the recognition that the spectacle is now a weapon. They whisper about insurance, about documents, about the jade bracelet as if it were a key to the family vault. Their concern is practical and merciless. Back at Tang Ling's side, Zhao Qingqing is not idle. She has pivoted from offensive designer to personal prosecutor. She arranges a private conversation with a whisper that is meant to wound. "You think you've won," she says in the artful way people say things meant to sting. You have made a mistake, Tang Ling answers with a smile that has steel in it. I made people look, she repeats. It is a mantra now. There's a difference. The city breathes and the gears start turning. There will be lawsuits. There will be board maneuvers. There will be whispered attempts to repaint the night as a scandal to be contained. But the raw human fact at the auction, the image of Wen Chuan bidding like a man trying to buy back a lost thing, cannot be completely erased by legalese. It has already entered the public memory. Yet, there are darker currents lurking behind the spectacle. Not everyone reacts with wonder. In the underbelly of corporate life, ambition sharpens to a point. There are those who see Tang Ling's theatrical success not as an awakening, but as a vulnerability to be exploited. Manager Fang takes notes. Li Fen calculates. They reach for options that do not require delicate conversation, whispers to security, a hand to the right thug, an idea to make noise, and then profit from the panic. Tang Ling is not naive. She had not expected the auction to solve everything. She had expected consequences. Her performance was not the end, but rather a detonator. She feels the gravity of what she has started. For every hand that claps, there are others that sharpen knives. Wen Chuan goes back to his offices. He sits in the glass tower and lets the city watch him decide what to do next. He calls for a briefing on the company's exposure. His voice on those calls is the old voice, crisp, decisive. But privately, in the press of a bathroom that smells of chlorine and cologne, he catches his reflection and looks like a man beginning to be disturbed by the person he has been pretending to be for 3 years. When the day stretches into night, Tang Ling receives another small private zip of news. One of the men hired for the funeral has been trailed and photographed leaving a warehouse late at night. Another has received a threatening note. There is a cast of shadows forming that will not be satisfied with social discomfort. They want capitulation. They want the scene scrubbed clean. They want business to resume with everyone in their neat places. She keeps the jade bracelet in a tiny box in her apartment, like a small wound she touches to remind herself she is not done. The city outside her window is a blur of lights like a string of promises. She thinks of the things she wants now that sight has been given to her. Not only acknowledgement, but the right to decide, to speak without asking permission, to protect her name, the life in her chest that had been numbed by neglect. The story has begun its dangerous unspooling. The auction was a blow that landed clean and echoed louder than everyone expected. But a single blow does not settle debts. It makes them visible. It wakes old ambitions. It takes the private and puts it under the hard light of public scrutiny. Tang Ling rises from the low chair and looks at the phone. There is an incoming message from Wen Chuan. She lets it ring through. She has lived 3 years in the slant shade of his absence. Now she has given him a crowd. Now the crowd is restless. Now, after the gesture of the auction, there are choices to be made that will not be solved by spectacle alone. Her inner voice is calm, but sharp. We forced them to look, she thinks. Now we have to decide who we become when they do. She turns the jade bracelet over in her palm and slips it onto her wrist. It fits like a question. It fits like a claim. Outside, the city hums. Inside, 10 men are sleeping in rooms that will be left messy in the morning. The press is drafting headlines. Boardrooms are preparing their motions. And somewhere the first small tendrils of retaliation are being whispered into the right ears. This was only the opening. The room still smells of champagne and old money. The game has changed its rules. Tang Ling has tossed a pebble into an old calm pond. Ripples will become tides. The question is who will be pulled under. When the lights go out in the suite, Tang Ling lies awake with the bracelet warm against her skin. She is not afraid. Not exactly. She is a woman who has been quiet too long and has learned the language of spectacle. She has learned that visibility brings danger, but it also brings choice. Somewhere in the city, a man who had grown used to being the center of everyone else's story sits in a glass office and counts the cost of being seen. He has lost something in the auction that is not measured in money alone. The night holds its breath. The morning will bring more than headlines. It will bring motions, threats, and a reshaping of power that will not be tidy. Tang Ling closes her eyes, and for the first time in years, she thinks about a future that is not defined by absence. There is a quiet knock at her door the next morning that is not a courtesy call, not a condolence. It is the knock of the city reacting to what she did. It is the first knock of the people who are offended, the people who are jealous, the people who are calculating their next move. She walks to the door and opens it before anyone can knock twice. On the threshold stands Zhao Qingqing, in a dress chosen to test her resolve, and Manager Fang, whose smile has a new, sharp edge. Behind them, a young man from the press holds a camera like an accusation. Mrs. Wen waits in the lobby with the soldiers of family strategy. Zhao Qingqing speaks first, all polished teeth and quiet fury. "You staged a spectacle," she says in a tone of someone lecturing a student. "You humiliated people." Tang Ling looks at her as she has looked at so many things that were meant to wound. "I made them look," she says simply. The air tightens. Manager Fang's eyes shift to the bracelet on her wrist, like a man taking inventory. "Do you understand what you have started?" he asks. His question is both warning and weapon. Tang Ling ties her hands together in a small, ironic way. "Yes," she says, "and I accept it." They exchange words like cards in a hand. They are testing the boundaries of what will happen next. Outside, the city opens its eyes on a headline that has not yet decided whether to pity her or to admire her. Inside, the people with the most to lose gather like predators, circling a new and unpredictable prey. Tang Ling closes the door and leans against it, feeling the sudden clean pressure of consequence. She has given them a show. They have reacted in predictable and unpredictable ways. The auction was a revelation, not a resolution. The real war, she senses, will happen in rooms without cameras and in documents that will decide more than gossip can. She walks to the window, to the tug of real estate and the shimmer of neon. She thinks of the 10 men, still an image of absurd defiance. She thinks of Wen Chuan bidding like a man trying to purchase back his missing years. She thinks of the jade bracelet, small, green, stubborn. The city breathes. So does she. A car pulls up to the curb below the building. 2 men step from it with briefcases that smell faintly of paper and intent. They are the kind of emissaries who bring opportunities and threats in the same envelope. Tang Ling opens the window, feeling the wind like a question. The wind will carry gossip. It will also carry decisions. She is ready, in the way a person who has been invisible learns to be, with theater and with steel. The game begins in earnest now. The auction was only the calling bell. There will be meetings, threats, lawyering, maybe worse. People who were comfortable with the old geometry of lives will not like the new lines of power she has drawn with a bracelet and a procession. Tang Ling slides the bracelet up her arm and looks at the ring of green on her wrist like a small crown. She has been given a sight she did not ask for. She will not waste it. The door to the suite opens again. This time it is Wen Chuan. He stands framed in the light like a rumor come to life. He looks at the bracelet on her wrist, and then at her face, and there is a silence that holds something like apology and something like accusation. "We must talk," he says. Tang Ling turns slowly. She feels like a woman who has just lit a bonfire in a room full of papers. The flames are visible. The smoke will make everyone cough. The choices she has made will pull others into the blaze, whether they like it or not. She answers simply, "Yes." There is no turning back. The auction night has broken the surface. Underneath there are currents, power, love, resentment, the machinery of a family and a company that have both learned how to survive by ignoring someone like her. They will not surrender their methods easily. Tang Ling reaches out and takes Wen Chuan's hand. It is a gesture that contains more possible meanings than any one man can hold. He squeezes back, awkward and human. For a second, the two of them are a small, unstable axis in a room that wants everything to be ordered. Outside, the city continues its indifferent hum. Headlines will run. Directors will convene. Manager Fang will calculate his next move. Mrs. Wen will be strategizing about how to contain this new narrative. Zhao Qingqing will be plotting a comeback. The 10 men will be on the road somewhere with the memory of an absurd, magnificent night. Inside this moment, Tang Ling knows the truth. She has reclaimed visibility, but she has invited battle. She is ready to fight. Not necessarily to get what the world thinks she ought to want. She is ready to take what she has earned, the right to be seen, and the right to decide what comes next. The room is heavy with promises and potential catastrophes. The next steps will not be easy. They will be loud, they will be messy, and yes, someone will lose something. But that is the cost of no longer being invisible. She tightens the bracelet on her wrist and draws a breath as though bracing for a plunge. The auction's echo still rings in her ears. The city's machines begin to turn toward the consequences. The story will spread like a stain under bright lights, and soon, there will be more than whispers. Tang Ling looks at Wen Chuan and thinks, for the first time in a very long while, about the future not as an empty room but as a place they might build together. On her terms this time. He meets her gaze. His eyes glint with the exhausted clarity of a man who has been rattled awake. "We will fix this," he says, both a promise and a challenge. She lets herself believe, for the slimmest of moments, that perhaps they might. Then she braces for the phone call she knows is coming. The one that will not be about sentiment, but about the cold calculus of shareholders, and the darker offers those like Manager Fang can make. Outside, the city waits. Inside, the bracelet rests like a small green sun. The pieces have been moved. The next hand is about to be played. The next morning breaks on a city already impatient. Phones ring like small alarms all over the skyscraper that holds Wen Chuan's empire. The board summons him again, this time with counsel breathing down their necks and headlines still warm from the night before. Numbers, risk assessments, lawyers in gray suits. These are the languages the directors speak. Wen Chuan answers on speaker, voice flat then taut, the CEO who always knows the right cadence to close a room. Yet when he hangs up, the room around him seems thinner, as if the thing that moves markets, certainty, has been shaken loose. Tang Ling's inbox is full of invitations to be explained away. There are emails with legalese folded into apologies, then a bank transfer for settlement that smells of desperation. There are also messages she did not expect. A dozen texts from strangers who were entertained last night and now want to be sure she is safe. The 10 men send their own, each with the sort of earnestness that makes Tang Ling feel ridiculous and grateful at once. The dancer texts a selfie from a noon rehearsal, hair still powdered with dust from the stage. The brooding model sends a voice memo of someone humming badly in the shower. Their absurd constancy is small comfort. The world is awake to her now, but attention can be a blade as easily as a bomb. She puts the bracelet on and walks into the day as if it were armor. Manager Fang does not sleep. His calculations have a temper to them now. This is less an aesthetic affront than a threat to the ledger. Board members are not merely offended. They are scared that emotion will have a market value if left to fester. Li Fen, who can make a spreadsheet look like scripture, has already started drafting contingency plans that involve quiet meetings, subtle smear campaigns, and if necessary, holding Wen Chuan accountable until his private life is no longer the company's problem. There are men at the periphery, the ones who make threats tidy and executable. They do not care about jade bracelets or the poetry of a funeral that isn't. They care about leverage. The first act of escalation is small and ugly. Late the next day, one of the 10, Dung, the dancer, doesn't show for rehearsal. His phone goes straight to a voicemail that isn't his. It's the sort of silence you recognize by the way it eats space. "They took him," the choreographer whispers into Tang Ling's kitchen over the phone, voice unsteady. "They took him after he left the studio." The men who took Dung do not want ransom on camera. They want fear. They are careful enough to leave no traces you can swear in court, but clumsy enough to miss the grain in the actor's shoe that a seasoned investigator might later find. They leave scared messages meant to taste like warnings. "Stop," the text says. Or it gets worse. Tang Ling doesn't stop. She does not take the notes, the threats, as news. She takes them as punctuation marks in a sentence she intends to finish. The decision to escalate back is immediate and theatrical, because she does not know any other language. She calls Wen Chuan. His voice is a low stone at 3 in the morning when the call comes, thin with sleep and something like guilt. When Tang Ling tells him Dung is missing, Wen Chuan groans once, an old sound of a man who has been confronted by consequences he never expected to feel. "Give me the details," he says. And there is suddenly a practical force in him that Tang Ling hasn't heard in months. He asks for names, for locations, for what Deng had been wearing. He asks, in the way someone trained to manage crisis asks, whether any CCTV covers the route. Things happen fast after that. Wen Chuan's private security, which had always acted as a distant hedgerow around his life, snaps into motion. For him, this is not only reputational risk, it has become personal. He can read the room and see the angles. He can also read his chest and find the tightness there. The men who took Deng are sloppy when they realize Wen Chuan's resources are engaged. A camera in a shabby noodle shop, the sort of place no one ever watches, catches a van with its taillights like a punctuation mark leaving a loading bay. A neighbor's apartment records an argument as someone throws open a trunk. Little things people assume are random become a trail. They find Deng in time. He's shaken, a little singed at the edge of his hair. The work of an escalated threat gone half wrong, but alive. When the van is intercepted, one of the captors tries to burn the interior to cover tracks. The flames catch a curtain. In the cramped panic of that van, an idea meant as intimidation almost turns murderous. The 10 men are absurd heroes. The movie star type who takes the driver's seat like a dare. The boy next door who kicks a door open. The dancer whose reflex saves Deng from smoke inhalation. They are not trained for any of this, but their loyalty has moved from performance to something like bravery. Firefighters come with the shriek of sirens and the must of diesel and hoses. The headlines that were going to say, "She made shallow mischief," instead say, "Kidnapping at center of corporate spat." The city likes drama, but it loves danger. Both make better paper. When Tang Ling finally sees Deng at the hospital, he laughs too loudly and cries under it. He tells the story in fragments. Faces he could not name. A van that smelled like cheap oil. A man who kept ordering him not to panic. "They thought they were clever," he says. "They thought we'd fold." "This is not a folding moment," Tang Ling answers, and her voice is steady in a way that must be performance because she is exhausted, and anger is the only clean fuel left. Manager Fang's attempts to hide his fingerprints are amateurish. He pays men, he gives vague orders, but he does not anticipate the way modern investigation stitches together metadata. A borrowed phone pinging a tower, a voucher purchased at a late-night convenience store, an ominous truck that stops by an industrial warehouse where men frequently meet. Wen Chuan's team compiles footage, conversations, and receipts into a quiet dossier that smells like inevitability. The retaliation never stops escalating. A week later, a delivery driver reports that a pallet of props, costumes, and a few personal effects Tang Ling had stored in a rented warehouse has been set alight. The flames are small but symbolic. The insurance will cover goods, but not the sense that someone is trying to rewrite the story by burning the evidence of her performance. The 10 men are furious in a new way. Performative outrage becomes practical fury. They pull away singes from a jacket and carry it to Tang Ling like a burnt flag. At night, a team sent to the warehouse is ambushed. A car screeches, there is a scuffle, and then the nosy curiosity of onlookers. Wen Chuan, who has no patience for cowardly violence, drives down himself, arrives in a coat and steps through the smoke like a man who has had to learn that not everything can be solved at the boardroom table. He holds a burned pamphlet in gloved fingers and looks at the ruin as if it were a personal failure. There is no speech. The quiet is its own indictment. The board responds to all this with a conventional panic. They call for shareholder meetings, for audits, for legal teams to be assembled. They say things that sound like they belong to a different era, about reputation and sequestration and liability. They threaten Wen Chuan. They threaten to review his capacity to lead should his private life continue to affect the company's public valuation. Men like manager Fang whisper about containment. Li Fen drafts memos about governance. Then someone on the board leaks a different fear, that the story, now threaded with violence, cannot be remedied by a press release. They want a scapegoat. Tang Ling does not wait to be their scapegoat. She meets Wen Chuan in a hospital corridor after they drag a jittery manager Fang in for questions that smell like the end of privilege. The fluorescent lights in the hall make their faces honest in a way the ballroom never would. "You could hand them Fang," Wen Chuan suggests quietly. His voice is a measured thing that has learned the mechanics of deals. "Tell them the men were acting on their own." And let them think the violence solves anything? Tang Ling asks, and there is something sharper than anger in her voice, a moral clarity hardened by betrayal. No, make them accountable. Make them show what they did. They plan a public surgical strike, a disclosure not of vengeance, but of documentation. Tang Ling's team, which includes a resourceful lawyer who once worked on embarrassing celebrity divorces, compiles records and evidence. Wen Chuan Security produces phone logs and location data. There is a ledger showing payments routed through a shell company, small, almost laughable amounts until stitched together. The trail leads to a manager who signs requisitions for security contractors when he thinks no one is watching. On a wet Tuesday, Tang Ling walks into a media scrum flanked by Wen Chuan and an attorney whose hair is too precise to be accidental. She sets down a pile of documents on a table in front of the cameras. There is slow, perfect choreography to the way she does it. It is not a speech. Her face says enough. The documents are raw and administrative. Invoices, timestamps, flight reservations, a chain of emails. They do what paperwork does best. They make abstract desires into concrete culpability. Reporters lean in. Cameras blink. Wen Chuan looks like a man who has been put on a stage he did not build, and yet there is a steadiness to him. He meets Tang Ling's eyes for a moment, and in that tiny exchange there is a tacit understanding. There are lines you cross for family now. The board cannot ignore the documents. Manager Fang's office clears like a room being vacated. Li Fen's name appears in footnotes. The company announces internal investigations, and the whispering about removing Wen Chuan softens in the face of legal exposure. Directors who once measured everything in margins now see a legal storm that could hollow the company's balance sheet. They choose, for the time being, containment over upheaval. There are consequences beyond suits and titles. The men who carried out the attacks are arrested. Their handlers vanish into the kind of legal limbo managers think can be controlled. Manager Fang is suspended pending investigation. Li Fen finds his inbox filled with requests for clarification he cannot answer. The family corners wag and lurch. Mrs. Wen expects an annihilation and receives instead a slow procedural inconvenience. She adapts, because she knows how. Tang Ling watches all of this with a curious detachment, as if she had watched a theater in which the stagehands are now tripping on their props. Then disaster, small and contained, catastrophic in its personal immediacy. During the raid on one of the safe houses used by the hired men, there is a stove left on, an overturned lamp, the unfortunate combination of human panic and poor ventilation. Tang Ling, who insisted on being present to witness points of evidence and to present a face that refused fish-hooked pity, inhales smoke when a door slams and the room fills. She collapses. Hospitals are the places stories accelerate. They are also places where time takes a different shape, faster for machines, slower for hearts. Tang Ling wakes in the antiseptic insomnia of an emergency ward to the sight of Wen Chuan's hand holding hers. His fingers are precise as always. He is watching the whiteboard in the room as if it were a market report. "You were reckless," he says, voice thin. "So were you," she answers, weak but intact. There is a murmur of tests. Bronchoscopy here. Oxygen there. Doctors bustle, and Dr. Lu, who has been Tang Ling's quiet anchor since the first diagnosis, stands at the foot of the bed with a folder that seems to have aged with him. He looks at the notes, frowns once, then asks for a re-evaluation. The re-evaluation is an administrative rectification that reads like a plot device and lands in the body like a rebuke. A lab technician in another hospital had mislabeled a sample weeks earlier. The chain of custody was garbled. Someone transposed a name and a code. A result that should have belonged to a different patient ticked her life into a corner. The words in medical charts that had once been peaks of terror, malignancy suspected, prognosis, are now, in the sterile arithmetic of paperwork, mistakes. Dr. Lu does not make it theatrical. He closes the folder and tells Tang Ling in a voice that balances between apology and relief. The tests were wrong. The room accomplishes the whole of grief's dialect in a few seconds. Tang Ling laughs like someone who has been administered caffeine and mercy at once. The laugh folds into a cry. The cry melts into a rage that is equal parts gratitude and fury. "You made us live as if we were dead," she says to no one and to everyone. "You almost let us bow out of a life we didn't consent to leave." It is an odd kind of vindication, and a jagged one. The diagnosis had cracked her life open in ways she could not have foretold. That crack let light and theater and battle into spaces that had been as blank as a made bed. The misdiagnosis is also an anger that wants names and consequences. There will be complaints filed and apologies that sound like legal tapes. Tang Ling signs them with a pen that trembles. But the hospital had one more surprise that refuses to be purely administrative. A nurse with a soft rhythm in her voice asks to run an additional test. They are thorough when code ambiguity is involved. And the test is not for anything cancer-related, but a different kind of life sign. A positive, unignorable hum that answers a different question. "You're pregnant," the nurse says. And then the room tilts like an old house. Dr. Liu orders an ultrasound because that is how the world now inches into clarity. On the screen, two tiny shapes hover like punctuation. "Twins," the radiologist says, with a professional warmth that sounds younger when it carries the word. The news lands as a kind of seismic grace. Tang Ling, who had rehearsed her exit twice, who had drafted wills in her head and placed the jade bracelet like a token on a shelf, laughs until she weeps. Wen Chuan's face, which had been a ledger lately, unmasks in a private animal way. He exhales a sound that might be a sob and might be a laugh and might be both at once. He loses it again, but differently. At the auction he was exposed for not being there. Here he collapses under recognition. He grabs Tang Ling's hand with a grip that is both apology and gratitude. He whispers, unsteady, "I was selfish. God, I'm so sorry." His voice is not a crafted address to a council room. It is the voice of someone who has no maps left. There are no miraculous turns here, only human responses. Tang Ling does not collapse into softness. She sits up and looks at him with the wry, fierce tenderness that has become her hallmark. "You should have been here," she says, dry. "But here we are." They make decisions in the small hours that feel large. They choose to keep the pregnancy private for a time to avoid a media feeding frenzy. They discuss the future with the kind of plainness that replaces flamboyant gestures. Wen Chuan admits that the company almost lost a CEO last week, not because of risk to the ledger, but because he had stopped measuring his life in anything other than market share. Tang Ling listens, and in the listening, there is power. Back outside, the company's wheels grind. Investigations ripple through departments like a slow chemical reaction. Manager Fang is suspended, pending a full forensic audit. Li Fen is escorted from his desk by a stern-looking counsel who carries a folder like a judge's mallet. Stock prices flap briefly, an animal startled, and then find footing. The directors who wanted Wen Chuan gone have to reckon with the legal exposure and the messy optics of scapegoating in the middle of a public scandal. For the moment, the company stabilizes not because the board is magnanimous, but because the legal and reputational costs of a coup would be catastrophic. Tang Ling uses the momentum to make a strategic, careful play. She speaks to a director who had seemed inflexible and reveals a simple truth. The company's narrative is damaged, and the only way to clean it is to show responsible change. She does not demand to be CEO. She demands a voice, an official role that allows her oversight into the company's philanthropic arm and corporate governance relating to employee welfare. She wants seats at the table where policies are made, not just lip service in the guest box. There is a negotiation. Wen Chuan fights behind the scenes for her requests in the language he knows. Contracts, minutes, clauses. He uses the weight of his name and, oddly, the vulnerability the public now knows to advocate for Tang Ling. Directors, calculating the cost of continuing a war, concede to a package that gives Tang Ling a decisive voice in social governance, a board observer role, and a pathway to a more substantial position should the company commit to reforms she outlines. It is not a takeover. It is not the sweeping power some on the internet speculated she would seize. It is instead a plausible transfer of influence that is both symbolic and functional. Mrs. Wen watches the negotiations with an expression that could be the slow cooling of a fire. Pride and protection wore on her face. In private, she hugs her daughter-in-law awkwardly, an action that feels like a truce. "You did not hesitate," she says in a way that almost sounds like admiration. Tang Ling accepts the truce without forgiving the past. She knows the strategic value of alliances and the loneliness of absolute victory. There are arrests and apologies and settlement agreements. Manager Fang is charged with orchestrating criminal intimidation. The judiciary moves as it must when evidence stacks neatly in files. Li Fen, whose arithmetic had always seemed immutable, finds his life reviewed by temporal accountants he never respected. There are scenes of men leaving offices with boxes of their belongings, their faces a private geography of disbelief. Corporate life is a theater in which exits are sometimes stage-managed but occasionally final. The 10 men become an odd, durable chorus through all of this. They show up at the hospital wearing shirts with slogans, Team Tang, and are promptly reined in by PR. They hold the fort in the public eye and are, in private, Tang Ling's unexpected family. One of them, the brooding model, confesses in a late-night corridor that he never imagined he'd be the kind of person who risks himself for another's life. "You made us see something," he tells her, and his gravity is small and sincere. The violence recedes, not because danger evaporates, but because exposure makes violence risky. The company puts new security protocols into place. The board begins a public-facing campaign about corporate responsibility. Tang Ling's seat at the table becomes a symbol. She uses it to propose an employee hotline and a fund for victims of corporate coercion. It is a quiet move that will make legalists roll their eyes and will quietly protect people who are not yet famous. Wen Chuan and Tang Ling begin a negotiation of a different sort in private. There are apologies. Yes, he offers them, and she accepts some. But Tang Ling sets terms. She will not return to being the invisible paperweight in a house of titles. She asks for nights together when possible. She asks that his phones be left in a drawer when they eat. She asks for transparency in the parts of her life that affect their future children. She does not demand claws of legal control as a test of love. She demands participation and consistent presence. The terms are human and unglamorous. They are the work of two adults deciding whether a union can be rewired. "I will not be an accessory to your success," she tells him once, standing at the balcony where city lights make a constellatory smear. "And I will not be a spectator to our children's lives." He listens like someone learning a new grammar. "Then teach me," he says. And for once it is not defensive. Months fold into manageable routines. Tang Ling's role in the company grows not by violent seizure, but by attrition of competence. She proves that she can read a balance sheet when she wants to, that she can meet investors with a steadiness that is not performative. Her projects, an employee welfare program, a foundation for artists displaced by corporate development, gain supporters not because she threatens men, but because she runs programs with an efficiency that makes them financially viable. Wen Chuan watches this with a complicated, renewed pride. He learns to show up in small ways that are steadier than any dramatic bid at an auction. Their reconciliation, when it arrives, is not a tidy scene with violins. It is patient and fitful. There are setbacks, a board meeting that drains his attention, a PR headache that drags them both into old patterns. But there are also small victories. Dinners where they both remember the names of the 10 men's partners. A weekend when Wen Chuan cancels a board call to be home for a routine ultrasound. The way his fingers find hers in the dark, without the old clumsiness. The pregnancy proceeds, cautious and bound to the new reality. There is joy threaded with a new dread. Being public people in a scandal-formed society means every personal development is fodder for rumor. They choose privacy fiercely. They announce the pregnancy to the public in a single, carefully framed statement. Gratitude for second chances, a call for compassion, and no gloating. The social media cycle gusts and then moves on. The important people know, the rest gossip. Tang Ling spends quieter hours imagining two small faces she will never let be accessories. At a carefully arranged shareholder meeting months later, Tang Ling sits not as a prop, but as a participant. She watches the faces of men who thought they could erase a woman habitually. Those faces are now slightly smaller. The board rubber stamps some of the reforms she proposed. Their language shifts slowly. Employee welfare now has budget lines. The jade bracelet sits in a safe. It has become a symbol of a turning tide, not merely a trinket of humiliation. Manager Fang is gone. and his exit has the small, hollow sound of consequence. Li Fen fades into legal limbo. Mrs. Wen adjusts to a life where her control is no longer absolute. She learns to wield influence in subtler ways. There are no dramatic last stands, no cinematic confessions at a family banquet. The rebalancing is bureaucratic, and, in its way, more permanent. The 10 men have, predictably, become a media tangent. They appear on a late-night show to talk about loyalty and performance in language that is equal parts sincerity and self-awareness. They make jokes about choreography and courage. Tang Ling watches the segment with the jade bracelet glinting on her wrist and laughs. The world is flatter now, less theatrical, but she keeps a private relish for the way she forced people to look. The couple's life recalibrates into small domestic things that feel enormous after years of curated absence. Wen Chuan learns to fold laundry. He learns to listen to stories that are not about profit. He brings her coffee in an awful porcelain mug that he calls a humble truce, and then misplaces it, which becomes a joke they repeat for months. Tang Ling teaches him how to play a children's game he is too grown for but learns anyway. It is clumsy and tender, and it fits both of them like a garment being tailored. There is no neat moral about punishment. Manager Fang faces legal consequences. A few of his cronies take plea deals. There are people who will never forgive Tang Ling for making the family look small, and others who will never forgive Wen Chuan for having been absent. But the central axis has shifted. She has a voice. He has a presence. The company is different because private lives made it so. A small private scene marks the end of the first chapter. Tang Ling sits in a nursery she has begun to imagine, flipping through a book of lullabies with 2 blank pages for names. Wen Chuan leans in the doorway, quiet enough to be welcomed, and behind him are the 10 men, dropping off a small bundle of baby supplies with ridiculous efficiency. They leave a note. For your future chaos. From those who made the present. Tang Ling laughs and wipes a tear with the back of her hand. The absurdity that started the whole thing, the 10 men, the jade bracelet, the auction, has become the hinge of a life she did not expect. She had set out to be seen and ended up deciding how she would be seen. Outside, in the glass towers, men still measure the world in profit and in the ability to control stories. Inside, a woman who almost walked away from life is pregnant with twins and making quiet rules for what will come into being. She will not be invisible. She will not be bowed. She will be loud in the ways that protect what matters, and strategic in the ways that can build a future. Wen Chuan and Tang Ling sit on the couch and talk about names until they run out of sensible answers and land on nonsense and laughter. They plan a small celebration, not a funeral and not an auction. A party without spectacle, meant only for the people who have promised to stay. The jade bracelet glints in the lamplight like a smirk. The city hums outside as it always does, indifferent, persistent, hungry for the next headline. The boardrooms will fill with other quarrels. Markets will find new reasons to breathe or stumble. But in a modest apartment that smells faintly of coffee and jasmine, a woman who had been ignored for years has written a new outline for her life. He had ignored her for 3 years. She had thrown a party with 10 handsome men, and in doing so, she made a man who measured his life in balance sheets lose his composure. In the shaking that followed, they both found things they had misplaced. Him, the ability to feel his absence. Her, the courage to demand a life not defined by other people's neglect. The ending is not a neat bow, it is a beginning. Tang Ling presses the bracelet to her pulse and smiles at the tiny life inside her, and she and Wen Chuan, imperfect and steadying, begin to map the shape of a future neither of them could have bought with money alone. If you love this twist-filled ride and want more story-driven drama, like and subscribe, and stay tuned for what happens next.